Have you ever ended a relationship, truly ended it, walked away, told yourself this time will be different, only to find yourself 6 months or a year later in almost exactly the same situation? Different person. Different name. Different face. But the same dynamic. The same arguments. The same feelings. The same pain. It feels like a curse. Like you are somehow doomed to repeat the same story over and over no matter how hard you try to write a different one. But this is not a curse. This is not bad luck. This is one of the most well-documented and deeply understood psychological phenomena in human behavior. And once you understand why it happens, truly understand it at the level where it actually lives, the pattern loses its power over you permanently. By the end of this video you will know exactly why you keep repeating the same mistakes in relationships and what it actually takes to finally break the cycle for good. Before you ever had your first relationship, your brain already had a relationship template. A blueprint built from thousands of hours of observation, experience, and emotional learning in your earliest years. This blueprint was not something you chose. It was not something you were taught consciously. It was absorbed from watching how the adults around you related to each other, from experiencing how they related to you, from the emotional patterns that were modeled as normal in your home environment. If the relationships you witnessed as a child were warm, consistent, and safe, your blueprint reflects that. If they were unpredictable, painful, or emotionally complex, your blueprint reflects that too. And here is the critical thing most people never realize. When you enter a romantic relationship as an adult, you do not start fresh. You bring that blueprint with you. Your nervous system, your attachment style, your emotional triggers, your tolerance for certain behaviors and your attraction to certain types of people, all of it flows from that original template. Changing the relationship without changing the blueprint is like repainting the walls of a house built on a cracked foundation. It looks different on the surface. But underneath, everything is exactly the same. We have touched on this before on the channel, but in the context of repeating relationship patterns it deserves its own deep examination, because it is perhaps the most counterintuitive and most important piece of the puzzle. The familiarity trap is the tendency of the human nervous system to seek out what is emotionally familiar, not what is healthy, not what is good for you, not what your conscious mind says you want, but what your subconscious recognizes as the emotional landscape of home. If home felt like anxiety, your nervous system seeks anxiety in relationships. If home felt like emotional unavailability, your nervous system is drawn to emotionally unavailable people. If home felt like walking on eggshells, your nervous system finds a strange kind of comfort in relationships where you are always slightly off balance. This is not masochism. This is not self-sabotage in the way most people use that term. This is your nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do, seeking the familiar, because the familiar, however painful, at least comes with the comfort of being known. The tragedy of the familiarity trap is that genuinely healthy love, consistent, calm, safe, reciprocal, often feels wrong to someone whose nervous system was calibrated in a painful environment. It feels too easy, too boring, not real. And so they move away from exactly the thing that would actually be good for them, toward the familiar pain that feels like home. Most people believe they choose their partners consciously. They have a list, perhaps mental, perhaps written, of qualities they are looking for. They think they are evaluating potential partners rationally, making deliberate choices about who to let in. But the research on partner selection tells a very different story. The initial attraction, the spark, the chemistry, the feeling of clicking with someone, happens far below the level of conscious thought. It happens in the limbic system, the emotional brain, within seconds of meeting someone. And what the limbic system is responding to is not the conscious checklist. It is pattern recognition. It is detecting, in this new person, emotional signatures that match the templates already stored from previous experience. This is why people so often describe their most intense attractions as feeling like they have known this person forever. Or feeling like they finally found someone who really gets them. What they are actually experiencing, though they cannot see it from inside, is the recognition of a familiar emotional pattern. Not necessarily a healthy one. Just a familiar one. And because that recognition happens below consciousness, it bypasses all the rational evaluation entirely. You do not choose the person who triggers your deepest patterns. You are pulled toward them before you even realize what is happening. Even when people manage to choose someone genuinely different, someone who does not have the obvious red flags of previous partners, they often find ways to recreate the familiar dynamic anyway. This is one of the most striking and most uncomfortable aspects of repetition compulsion, the psychological term for the tendency to unconsciously recreate painful past experiences. It works in both directions. Not only do people select partners who fit their emotional template, they also behave in ways that eventually produce the familiar dynamic even within a relationship that started differently. The anxiously attached person, terrified of being abandoned, begins to cling, to demand reassurance, to push for closeness in ways that eventually drive a partner away, thereby recreating the very abandonment they were afraid of. The person who grew up feeling unseen begins to make themselves invisible in relationships, not asking for what they need, not expressing what they feel, and then feels unseen, thereby recreating the original wound. The person who learned that love comes with control begins unconsciously accepting or even inviting controlling behavior, mistaking it for care because it matches the emotional signature of what love felt like in childhood. In each case, the person is not simply choosing the same type of partner. They are actively, though entirely unconsciously, participating in the recreation of a painful familiar dynamic. Because that dynamic, however painful, is what their nervous system knows as intimacy. Every repeated relationship pattern has a wound at its center. Not the surface wound of the last relationship, or the one before that. The original wound, the earliest experience that created the emotional template being replicated. For some people, it is the wound of emotional abandonment, a parent who was physically present but emotionally unavailable, leaving the child with a chronic hunger for connection that was never fully satisfied. For others, it is the wound of conditional love affection that came with performance requirements, teaching the child that they are only lovable when they are useful, successful, agreeable, or perfect. For others, it is the wound of unpredictability, love that was genuine but inconsistent, teaching the nervous system to live in a permanent state of alert for the next withdrawal. For others, it is the wound of enmeshment, being so completely absorbed into a parent's emotional world that they never developed a clear sense of where they ended and another person began. These wounds do not announce themselves. They do not show up in therapy intake forms as the reason for your relationship patterns. They show up as the type of person you are inexplicably drawn to. As the arguments that keep recurring no matter who you are with. As the feelings that arise in intimate relationships that seem disproportionate to what is actually happening, because they are not responding to what is actually happening. They are responding to the original wound that the current situation has accidentally reopened. One of the most frustrating experiences for people who have done significant personal development work is realizing that understanding their patterns does not automatically change them. You can read every book. You can spend years in therapy. You can be able to articulate your attachment style, name your wounds, identify the pattern while it is happening in real time, and still find yourself doing it again. This is not a failure of insight. It is a misunderstanding of where patterns actually live. Patterns do not live in the rational mind where insight operates. They live in the nervous system, in the body, in the automatic responses that fire before conscious thought even begins. Insight is essential, it is the necessary first step. Without understanding the pattern, you cannot even begin to interrupt it. But insight without experimental change is like knowing the directions to a destination without ever getting in the car. The knowing is real. But the knowing alone does not move you. What actually changes patterns is new experience, specifically, the repeated experience of doing something different in the moments when the old pattern would normally activate. Each time you pause before the automatic response. Each time you choose the unfamiliar healthy option instead of the familiar painful one. Each time you sit with the discomfort of doing something new rather than reaching for the comfort of the old pattern, you are creating new neural pathways. Slowly. Imperfectly. But genuinely. Shame is one of the most powerful forces that keeps people trapped in repeated relationship patterns, and it operates in a particularly cruel way. When you begin to recognize your own patterns, when you can see that you keep choosing unavailable people, or that you keep abandoning yourself in relationships, or that you keep recreating the same painful dynamic, the natural human response is often shame. What is wrong with me? Why do I keep doing this? I should know better by now. This shame feels like self-awareness. It feels like taking responsibility. But it actually functions as the opposite. Shame is a state of identity. It says I am broken, I am damaged, I am fundamentally flawed. And when you are operating from a shame state, you cannot access the curiosity, the self-compassion, and the willingness to try something new that actual change requires. Instead, shame drives you either into self-punishment, which changes nothing, or into denial, which changes nothing. The shift that actually makes change possible is moving from shame to curiosity. From what is wrong with me to what happened to me that created this pattern, and what do I need to learn to do differently? That shift, from self-condemnation to self-inquiry, is not soft or self-indulgent. It is the most practically effective move you can make if you genuinely want to break the cycle. Breaking a deeply ingrained relationship pattern is not a single decision or a single moment of clarity. It is a gradual, non-linear process that happens across multiple dimensions simultaneously, and understanding what those dimensions are is the difference between trying and actually changing. The first dimension is awareness, developing the ability to see the pattern while it is happening, not just in retrospect. This requires slowing down enough in relationships to notice what is being triggered and why, rather than simply reacting automatically. The second dimension is somatic work, learning to work with the nervous system directly. Because patterns live in the body, changing them requires body-based practices, therapy modalities like EMDR or somatic experiencing, breathwork, mindfulness, physical practices that teach the nervous system new responses. The third dimension is corrective experience, having real experiences in real relationships that contradict the original wound. Not just understanding that you are worthy of consistent love, but actually experiencing it. Not just knowing that safe intimacy exists, but actually feeling what it is like to be in it. The fourth and perhaps most important dimension is self-relationship, the quality of your relationship with yourself. Because how you relate to yourself in private, how you speak to yourself, how you meet your own needs, how you handle your own emotions is the template from which all your external relationships flow. Change that template and everything downstream changes with it. The most dangerous moment in breaking a relationship pattern is the beginning of a new relationship. Because this is precisely when the old pattern feels most alive, when the familiar pull is strongest, when the unconscious recognition of known emotional signatures is most seductive, and when the newness of the situation provides the perfect cover for the pattern to disguise itself as something fresh. Starting over without repeating requires a fundamentally different approach to the early stages of relationships. It requires slowing down deliberately, not because something is wrong but because speed is how the pattern bypasses your awareness. It requires paying attention to how you feel in the relationship, not just how you feel about the person. Healthy connection produces a quiet, steady sense of safety, not the breathless intensity that the familiarity trap mistakes for chemistry. It requires watching for the moments when you abandon yourself, when you shrink, when you pretend, when you perform rather than simply being, and treating those moments as information rather than necessity. And it requires being willing to choose differently in the small moments, the ones that seem insignificant. The moment you say what you actually think instead of what you think they want to hear. The moment you express a need instead of pretending you do not have one. The moment you feel the pull toward the familiar painful pattern and choose, just this once, to do something different. Those small moments, accumulated over time, are how a new pattern is built. You are not doomed to repeat the past. You are not cursed. You are not broken beyond repair. You are someone who was given a blueprint in circumstances you had no control over, and who has been living from that blueprint without fully realizing it was there. Seeing the blueprint does not trap you inside it. It is the first step toward rewriting it. And rewriting it slowly, imperfectly, with compassion for yourself and patience with the process is genuinely possible. People do it every day. Not by finding the perfect partner. Not by trying harder to make the same approach work. But by doing the deeper work of understanding what drives the pattern, healing the wound at its center, and building a relationship with themselves strong enough to sustain a different kind of love. If this video helped you see your own patterns more clearly, subscribe right now. Every single week we go this deep into the psychology of what makes us human. The things most people feel but nobody explains honestly. Nobody else is going this deep. And you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the pattern you keep repeating in relationships? Just describe it. You do not have to have it figured out. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read today to feel less alone in their own cycle. And next week, we are covering something that will make you rethink everyone around you. The psychology of why some people drain your energy just by being near you. Why certain people leave you feeling exhausted, anxious, or completely empty after spending just a short time with them, even when nothing obviously bad happened. The science behind this is darker and more fascinating than most people expect. And if you have ever walked away from someone feeling like they took something from you that you cannot quite name, that video is going to hit very close to home. You do not want to miss it. See you.